When I was a lad, my grandfather used to say, be smart and stay hard. So I've chosen that as the tagline for here for this educational set. But I've changed it to get smart and stay hard because I'm going to teach you things that you can use to make your life and your financial situation better. And I'm not a financial advisor, and what I'm giving you is not financial advice. But before we get into that, I wanted to let you guys know who I am. I want to introduce myself, I guess, so that you understand why I'm doing what I'm doing, and so that there's a little bit more trust if you guys start taking advice from me, as well as start having me help you personally. Now, my name is JD, and I grew up in Ireland with my grandfather. And my parents lived here in the United States. I went to live with my grandfather when I was 6 months old, and I moved back to the States when I was 14. Immediately after moving back to the States, my parents lost their home. And I moved back to start going to school. So for the first 2 years that I was in university, I was homeless. I lived in the middle of the California desert in a tent with my parents. Now that wasn't a huge change for me because while I lived with my grandfather, most of the time I slept on the floor and spent most of my time reading, doing homework, and working in my uncle's and my grandfather's various businesses. Now, like many of you, I'm sure, my parents were not great with money. They hated credit, they hated banks, and with good reason. Banks are predatory, credit companies are predatory, mortgage companies are predatory, and bigger than all of them, student loans are predatory. They prey on people's fear, needs, and they take advantage of everyone who uses their services. Now, there are ways to circumvent that, and we're going to talk about that in future videos. But my parents were so scared of these things that they never allowed themselves to ever learn anything about them. They religiously avoided financial anything. And as I got older, I started to do the same, even though my grandfather, who's a very successful businessman, taught me very differently. So it took a lot of failure and self-analysis for me to finally get to a point where I, over a course of 10 years of running businesses, making a lot of money, losing a lot of money, learned that at some point I was going to have to learn how to understand money and learn to understand all of these products and systems that wealthy people and rich people use, because I didn't, and I didn't think I'd have to. I thought I could just work hard, put my nose to the grindstone, and I'd be fine. But in 2018, we lost my mother. She left us very suddenly, and there was no explanation. We think it was malpractice, but we had no way to prove it. And 6 months later, my father passed away. Now, my father was not a surprise. He'd had Alzheimer's since about 2014, and we had been expecting him to go since then. And what we learned just before my mother passed away is that my father had an excess of tax and other debts that we were unaware of because his Alzheimer's had started setting in before we knew, and him and my mother had been separated. So there was a pretty big schism, pretty big gap of time where we had unaccounted for. And in the United States, technically debtors are not allowed to come after you for the money that your parents owe. But because of my name being on some things that my parents owned and their name being on some things that I owned, guess what? They did start coming after us, and it wasn't 2 days after my mother died we started getting calls. And the night my father passed away, I started getting collection calls. And that is the case for so many people in the United States. Hell, 91% of people in the US who lose their primary breadwinner end up with a foreclosure if they own any kind of property. So even though my parents left stuff behind for us, most of it was linked with debt. And we think like, oh, well, my parents' debts are going to be their debts. I'm not going to have to deal with them. And we very much believe that the sins of the father will not be passed on to the children. But I'm here to tell you that that's not the truth. And it's not true for a lot of people. But there are ways that you can prepare. And that's why I wanted to share what I've learned over the course of the last 4 years. Now, I made a lot of bad decisions, both personally and professionally, that led me to losing just about everything. Not just once, but several times. And I've made small fortunes and I've lost small fortunes. But it wasn't until 2018 when my mother passed away that I decided to start getting educated about financial literacy. And it wasn't until just this last year that I really put into motion all of the wheels that I'd been building and greasing. And I decided to start this series to help spread what it is that I have learned to all of you. So that's my introduction. I'm just a poor Irish boy who ended up making a lot of bad decisions in order to learn how to make good decisions. And now I want to share that process with you. And I want to be clear, this is not going to work immediately for everyone. You do have to put in work, you do have to put in time, you are going to have to learn new skills, and that might be a little bit daunting. I can walk you through it, but I cannot do it for you. I can show you what's available, I can demystify a lot of things, and I can make sure that all of these big scary things like investment accounts, annuities, insurance, and all of the things that we think like, oh, that's for rich people, I can demystify it and I can make it a lot less scary. But I cannot force people to do the things that they want to do, and I'm not going to try and get you involved in something that you cannot manage on your own. So the whole purpose and goal of what I'm doing here is education. So why don't you join me in the next video where I'll tell you what it is that we're going to be learning here. So get smart, stay hard, and I'll see you over there.